Continuing education knows that at the end of the day, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we really listen to their needs, and we can offer them flexible options both within continuing education and across the campus.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Good morning. This is the 78th Annual Conference on World Affairs. Welcome. My name is Jenny Kessem. I'm a psychotherapist that specializes in neurodiversity for adults, and I work with individuals and couples, and I lead a group for neurodivergent people who are working on unmasking, and I am proudly autistic. Today's date is April 14th. It is 9:30 a.m., and the title of this panel is Neurodiversity in the Workplace, Creating Opportunity for All. Before we get started on our topic of today, I'd like to read something about this land that we are on, and this is a statement from CU. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Thank you. Once again, welcome to the Conference of World Affairs and today's discussion. We ask that all of you attendees remain respectful throughout the discussion and refrain from interruptions. Signs, banners, noisemakers, and other audible disruptions are not permitted and will result in those responsible being asked to leave the room. Time will be allotted for your questions from our in-person audience. We will take your questions via handwritten note cards. Please raise your hand if you have a question, and will the producers in the back just raise your hands? Thank you. A producer will collect it and bring it up to me. I'm not going to guarantee I can ask every question that comes in, but we'll do our best. Okay, and so since we've acknowledged the land that we're on, I want to also do something a little out of the ordinary and acknowledge the body that you're in right now. So this is how I run my groups. This is how I work with myself and with neurodivergent people, that I just want to invite each of us to take a few moments here to remember that we're in bodies. And if you like to close your eyes to do that, you can. That's not required. You can do this thing I'm doing your own way, including saying, hell no, I'm not doing this. So I just want to invite you to take your attention inward just for a moment or two. Just noticing your own body breathing. Acknowledging that you got your body here today. You got your nervous system here today. We all have bodies, nervous systems, spines. And that many of us run quite a bit of stress for various reasons that might have to do with us all experiencing the world differently. And so what if, as a thought experiment and a body experiment, what if the way that you process the world, the way that your body is, belongs? What might you do to be just a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more authentic, a little bit more yourself for the next hour that we spend together? And I'm inviting the panelists to do the same thing, and myself. Wonderful. So if you want to keep your eyes closed and your attention on your body, go for it. But I'm going to change our focus now. And anytime throughout this hour we spend together, I highly recommend you take some more moments to just take your attention inward and check in. Am I breathing? Am I stressed? Why? What might I need to do for myself? Okay. So I'm going to turn the attention to our wonderful panelists, and let's just go in order from me. So I want to just invite you each to introduce yourselves and take about 5 minutes to share what you bring to this discussion.
Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Carrie Magro. I'm going to do something unorthodox as well, and I'm also going to start with a poem. So this poem is called A Letter I Would Have Written for My Parents When I Was Still Non-Speaking. Dear Mom and Dad, I know it's breaking your heart to see me as I am now. Most of the kids we know are starting to talk, while I'm just making sounds. I'm lashing out because I'm struggling. I can't communicate my needs, and things are just not going the way I wish they would. I scream and fight with you every single time you try and bathe me because I can't stand the feeling of water on my skin. And I cringe anytime I hear thunder. And I don't like to be touched because of my sensory issues. Even now, as we make all the adorable videos of me dress up as one of the best looking toddlers of all time, I know things aren't easy, and we don't know what the future has in store. I want to tell you, though, to keep fighting for me and believing in me, because without you both, the greatest advocates I'll ever have in my life, I'm not going to be the person I am today. There is a lot of hope in this community, and you both play a huge part in that. Things are going to get better, and without you, that wouldn't be possible. At 2.5, you're going to find out from a doctor that I have this thing called autism. In 1992, it will be something that you've only heard from some of the leading experts in the field and the 1988 movie Rain Man. The road now is going to be difficult, but we're going to get through it together. Supports are going to be difficult to come by at this time. The numbers of autism in the United States are about 1 in every 1,000, and still so many people still don't understand. Life is going to be difficult. Challenges are coming, but here's why you should fight through those challenges with me. By fighting for me every single day while providing me occupational, physical, speech, music, and theater therapy for the next 15 years, while giving me support at home and in school, I'm going to grow into an adult who is a professional speaker and gives talks about autism with companies across the country about the importance of neurodiversity in the workplace. Because if you fight for me right now and never give up, not only will I be that speaker, but I'll have the opportunity to, it's hard to have this in the entire time, 7 Amazon best-selling books, get the opportunity to work on a major motion picture that makes $30 million in the United States, and get the opportunity to work as an autism consultant on Netflix Love on the Spectrum US. And maybe most importantly, I will grow into an adult who embraces affection. Love, your son, Carrie. For everyone at the conference here today, now coming from a 38-year-old adult who now has his doctorate in educational technology leadership and has traveled across the globe speaking with employee resource groups about the ROI benefits of hiring talented neurodivergent individuals in the workplace. Regardless of your personal connection to the cause here today, I can only hope for the best for every single one of your loved ones. As someone who now resides in Jersey City, New Jersey, I like to say that we need to continue to advocate and fight every single day for reliable, neurodiverse resources across the lifespan and across the spectrum for those in our community. Thank you.
I did not come prepared with a poem, so please forgive me. My name is Laura Harder. This is my 5th year speaking at CWA. I am a cybersecurity leader. I am the vice president for ISSA International, which is a not-for-profit that focuses on cybersecurity, and I'm also a service member. I'm now in the 26th year of my military career. And what you would find really interesting is that in cybersecurity, technology, and in the military, we have a lot of individuals who are also on the spectrum. The call for me today is to talk about my experiences. I am not personally neurodivergent, or at least I've not been diagnosed that I know of, though these conversations are making me a little wary that maybe perhaps. I have, though, raised 5 children, 4 of them diagnosed on the spectrum at different levels and capacities. But as a leader, I've also been able to lead people, lead teams, help individuals get the supports that they need. But most importantly, what I've learned is what breaks people, what makes them successful versus what makes them quit, and what leaders can do differently, how we can be supportive as a parent would be supportive of their child. Because when we make neurodivergent individuals successful in the workplace, there is a return on investment. There is an incredible superpower, and this is what I speak to typically in cybersecurity forums. Individuals who are autistic and on the spectrum at every capacity, some of them have an incredible superpower to identify patterns in ways that other people can't. Those patterns help us identify threats. Those people bring incredible value to our businesses and into the works that they do. And so I advocate for them, not just because I'm a parent who wants to see my children succeed in life, but because I see my children and every individual who struggles with their neurodiversity in social places, in loud places, in busy places, in bright places. And so I hope today to bring my perspective as a parent and as a leader to this conversation.
I'm Ty Tashiro, and I think I'm here because I wrote a book called Awkward, The Science of Why We're Socially Awkward and Why That's Awesome. And my background's in research psychology, and that's the book I thought I wrote. The Washington Post called it a memoir, which I didn't really realize it was so personal. So I had some late life insight probably at that point. Let me tell you a little story that I hope relates to the topic today. A couple years ago, one of my friends was getting married. We went on a bachelor trip. It was the most pure weekend ever. We went for like 3 days and went camping. And everyone else was an experienced camper, but me. And one of the neat things about this group and the groom is he said everyone should share something with the group that they're good at, and which is a really cool thing to do. So one guy who was a real outdoorsman, was going to teach us how to make fire by hand. Have you ever tried to make fire by hand? You kind of think you know how to do it. It is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. And so you're sitting there with this flint, and you're striking it together. And do you know that feeling when everyone else gets something and you're the last person to get it? That was definitely me. So about 20 minutes later, I'm still working on this flint, not a single spark. Everyone else has started a fire at this point. And I got a bit meditative at that point. And I thought, I don't know who the first person was to make fire, but I think I know what they were like. It was someone, probably, sitting in a cave. Everyone else is hanging out, being cold. And then there's, let's say, Jane over in the corner, just rubbing rocks together, right? It's just rubbing rocks. Everyone else sits there and they're like, there's Jane rubbing the rocks again. I don't know what she's doing, but she just keeps doing it. She's too stubborn to stop. And then one day, all of a sudden, there's a spark, and she's excited. She gets even more hyper-focused on rubbing these rocks together. And eventually, one day, right, she stumbles upon creating fire. Now, that's pretty cool. A little bit dangerous, probably, in that environment, but pretty cool. And now, let's think about the group. What's just happened for the group? From an evolutionary perspective or anthropological perspective, this is an invaluable breakthrough for the group and for probably humanity as a whole, right? But what did it take to get there? It took someone who had maybe some unusual interests. Most people aren't interested in rocks that much. It took someone who was unbelievably persistent and focused. And it took someone with a curious mind and who didn't care too much about the judgment that was coming from her fellow peers in the cave. And, I finally did get the fire to work, by the way, thank goodness. And it's kind of ended my thought experiment. But as we talk today, maybe just keep some of those things in mind. There are qualities about folks who have autistic traits that can make it difficult to understand social situations or emotions or communication. But some of those same characteristics are the exact traits that can lead to extraordinary achievements and innovations.
Thank you all so much. This is exciting. So my first question is in a way basic and in a way very complex. But before I get to that question, I just want to read a statistic for you that a 2023 survey of more than 1,000 young adults found that over half of Gen Zers identify as neurodivergent, and 92% see neurodiversity as an asset in leadership. So I just wanted to give that statistic because it's fascinating. And then my question is, how do each of you define neurodiversity? What does that word even mean?
Well, this is a great question because it's something that comes up so much of the time in the companies that we work with. A lot of companies still don't know the difference between neurodiversity and disability. It would shock you. I was in a social skills class when I was 11 and a half years old, and we were playing disability celebrity bingo, I kid you not. And we were learning that Michael Jordan has ADHD. I'm laser focused key interest growing up, neurodivergent with basketball, so that was pretty cool. And then the last one was Dan Aykroyd. And Dan Aykroyd grew up with two laser focused key interests like myself. His two laser focused key interests were to become a crime detective and also to become a ghost hunter. And he took those two key interests to co-write the script in the 1980s with Bill Murray called Exactly. Years later, he would say it was because of his neurodiverse condition he was able to come up with that script. So when we talk about the whole definition of neurodiversity, one of the things that I educate companies about is really understanding the differences between disability and neurodiversity. Often when I was growing up, people would say, well, back in my day, we didn't have any of that autism or ADHD stuff. Yes, we did. It was just being underdiagnosed. So the importance of understanding that neurodiversity is an integral part of who you are, and without that neurodiverse condition, you would not be the same individual. And obviously, it goes farther into that. I've worked with companies like S&P Global, TD Bank on their employee resource group practices on neurodiversity hiring, and the Department of Labor indicates that we have a long way to go to even have these conversations, because when people think of neurodiverse in our community, often they still think physical limitation, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. Many of our kids are very brilliant, and as my dear friend in the autism and neurodiverse world, Dr. Temple Grandin, says, interests and talents can turn into careers. We need to nurture the strengths that are going on, and that's the key to neurodiversity, and it's how it's defined.
In my experience, I think that neurodiversity is just a way that your brain works that is different. And it's challenging, I think, if you perceive yourself to be what we call normal. And I'll be honest, I said this before, no one's normal, we're all a little weird. When your brain, and this is the experience that I have with a lot of my direct reports, when your brain thinks differently, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But like you mentioned earlier, if you have a child who doesn't speak at the age where you expect it to happen, my stepbrother and one of my children did not speak until they were 5 years old. And as a parent, you think, well, what's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? But the fact of the matter is, as a Hispanic person, there is a lot of stigma between what we call mental health illnesses and what we expect to be neurodiverse, like typical behavior. And for females, and I think we mentioned this earlier, Jenny, is females are taught to mask their behavior. You're taught to just be like everyone else when you maybe aren't that way. The most incredible thing about some of these individuals, my daughter included, is she has this brilliant mind where she makes up stories and she has casts and characters and plot lines, and she was just very invested in this world. My youngest stepson was, at the time, also struggling with his communication and being able to communicate the world that he was living in. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the neurodiversity of their brain was bad. And the challenge for us as adults who are helping raise and teach and grow and mentor and love those around us is that that's not less. It's just different. And just because somebody doesn't think like me doesn't make them wrong. And that's, I think, the thing that we need to very much change about what we consider on the spectrum, right? When my daughter was diagnosed, we still called it Asperger's. It's no longer called that anymore. It's just part of the autism spectrum disorder. When my son was diagnosed, they didn't give him a level number that they now give. So things have changed incredibly over the years, and I think for the good. But at the end of the day, neurodiversity is just that you think a little differently. Not bad, never bad, just different. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember.
I really like the emphasis on the distinction between or health model. There we go. With what's been said so far. So I would fully agree with my points. And there's, I was trained in the medical model. So I was trained in kind of the opposite of neurodiversity, where you diagnose people and you focus on what they can't do and what's wrong with them versus what they can do and what their strengths are. I think there is some knowledge from that and some value that we can use for good, but to only view people in that way is I think, pragmatically not a good way to proceed. So the neurodiversity movement, as I saw it, was, maybe the problem isn't with an individual and their deficits, maybe the problem is with society, and that we don't provide opportunities and understanding for people with differences. And this can get very contentious, like a lot of things in America. And so there's different opinions about it, but I think some, is probably the most helpful place to be. One other thing I just want to follow up on regarding the statistic. I find this really interesting because I'm a stats nerd, but if you take a kind of medical model approach to diagnosing, So using the ICD, which is one, like the DSM, one of these diagnostic manuals. In 2011, the rate of autism by that stringent standard was 1 in 434. And it was even lower, as we heard earlier. And by 2022, that went to 1 in 158. That's a dramatic difference. Now, part of that reason is because females traditionally have been underdiagnosed. And so you've seen an increased recognition that, yes, females can also be autistic as well. Also, racial minorities are underdiagnosed, and there's more appreciation, expertise there. Now, here's what I find interesting. Look at community billing. So you look at what therapists actually do in the real world. Different. So in 2000, it was 1 in 150 was the rate, if you take what's actually happening in the community. By 2018, that went to 1 in 44. Let me just say that again. In 2000, it was 1 in 150. By 2018, that went to 1 in 44. I don't have an opinion about whether these numbers are right or wrong, but I just want to make the point that there's a dramatic difference now in how we think about it. The last thing I'll say is that I find it interesting in general when it comes to diagnoses, whether it's depression or anxiety or OCD or it's not dichotomous. You don't have something or not have something. That's how we practice it in mental health. We give you a diagnosis or we don't. But if you actually look at the data, almost every single mental disorder follows a bell curve. It's normally distributed in the general population. That means the average person in the general population might have like 1 or 2 mild autistic traits. There's people at the 90th percentile, for example, who wouldn't have an autism diagnosis, but they have pretty significant and severe social skill deficits, communication problems, and restricted interests. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. You might sit here today and think, that sounds a little bit like me, and it's probably true. You might have 1 or 2 traits, but not at the level that would be diagnostic. But you might be someone who's pretty high up there, 85th percentile, 90th percentile, 95th percentile. In that case, you're dealing with a lot of the same things, and so when we say neurodiversity, I think that's another important thing to keep in mind, is that we all have our idiosyncrasies and challenges, and you don't have to have a diagnosis to deal with some of these things.
Thank you. So there's so many ways this discussion can go, and I'll just say it's awkward to press the button. I'm just going to take us in a little bit of a different direction before we get to specifically the topic of the workplace. So we're kind of starting generally and getting more specific. Can you talk about masking? What is that? How does it happen? How do you recognize it?
It looks different for everyone. And just by a show of hands really quickly today, do we have any parents who have a child who has autism? Educators who support autistic or neurodivergent students? BCBAs, therapists, self-advocates? Every single one of us in this room at some point in our lives have done this thing called stimming. And stimming is a way of self-regulation. And I've seen every single one of you have done it during this presentation. When you rock back or forth, when you hands, when you click your pen, that's a stim, and it's a way to self-regulate. When I bring up masking to students all the way towards senior leaders at Fortune 500 companies, what I tell them is that masking is going to look vastly different compared to every single individual because it is such a wide spectrum. I love the conversation we've had about girls on the autism spectrum today because of societal norms. A lot of the time when it comes to girls who are neurodivergent on the spectrum, they're always told to behave better than the boys, keep their hands to their sides as a way of living up to those societal norms. That has led to a lot of masking. I think it's one of the biggest reasons, in addition to the fact that we still have a stigma of autism and neurodiversity being that white male who's great at math and would take shots with Tom Cruise and win you $88,000 on the blackjack tables counting cards. And that is not the case in our community. So understanding masking can look different. It could be someone who is trying to force eye contact. It could be someone who is forcing themselves to fit into a norm. And there's a lot of damage that can go into that, especially in our companies. Workplace bullying continues to be on the rise in many of our companies, which is why these conversations are needed. Masking can look vastly different for every single individual, and it can lead to burnout. It can lead to mental health associated conditions over time if not treated. And that's why companies understand the true need for diversity, because when someone has a professional speaker come in to give professional development on neurodiversity in the workplace, it helps them feel seen. It gives them something to feel validated by as part of these conversations.
I love that you mentioned stimming. I didn't know what it was. I learned, obviously, with my children. One of my favorite things that I think women do that masks their stimming is hair twirling. Do you guys ever see, like, maybe not so much these days, but growing up, girls were always told to stop fidgeting and to, just, I don't know what it's like today in classrooms, and I hope that kids get more time to walk and kind of move around and be active in their environments. I have seen masking, though, in adults in some of the most interesting ways. I had a direct report who was in the Air Force. And I don't know if you all know this, but you cannot have a diagnosis of autism and be entered into the Air Force. But you can, as an adult, be diagnosed with autism after you've entered the Air Force, which makes for a very interesting experience for everyone. Has anyone here ever been in the military, served in the military? Nobody? Okay, cool. Anybody watched Forrest Gump? Okay. There is a great scene in Forrest Gump where the drill sergeant says, "What is your mission, Private Gump?" And he says, "To do whatever you tell me to do, drill sergeant." And he said, "You are a F word, genius. You have an IQ of 160. You are going to be very successful." Forrest Gump was very good at what he did, but he showed the environment. As you're watching the movie, you can tell that he is different, right? You're kind of shown how he grows up and all of the challenges that he goes through. But he becomes very successful. At the same time, he also is taught to mask. You watch him learn how to do the things that we expect normal people, right, again, to do. And the fact is that that's very challenging. For a lot of these adults, we call them in our household and on social media spoons. You're issued a number of spoons a day. Those spoons can do one bite of things at a time, and you have a certain number of them. But when you run out of spoons for the day, you are done. And in our family, we oftentimes will ask our adult children, "Have you run out of spoons? Are you unable to continue to mask and do the things that we expect you to?" And now there's this great book about cats have autism. All cats have autism. If you have never read it, it is a fantastic book. Because cats don't like noises and they don't want to be around a lot of people and they want to feel safe. And a lot of times they hide under the bed. And for one of our adult children, we got them a loft bed so that they can literally sit under the bed. And so we say, "Do you need to go and hide under the bed?" And the fact is that that's sometimes what they need to do. But they have spent all day masking, working their adult jobs and doing the adult things that we ask them to do. And they can do that for a period of time, but not forever. And you're right about the burnout. You run out of spoons and you're done. You run out of spoons for enough days in a row, and you could be done for months. Burnout for some people can take 2 years to recover. And that is incredible. In that period of time, you may be unemployed. In that period of time, you may not be able to finish school or do household chores. And that is what we need to understand, is that we need to try to prevent the burnout that is just so dangerous for people.
So, talking to somebody and they don't look you in the eye, what's your, just kind of reflexive assessment of that? And there could be a lot of them, and it would be totally natural. You could think they're uninterested in what you're saying. You might think they're disrespectful, for example, and that's okay. It would be a natural reaction to have. There's 2 reasons to look people in the eye. One is you want to convey the social message. I'm interested in what it is that you're telling me. The second reason is is the best place to decode emotion is in the eye region. And so it's rich with information. Now, looking someone in the eye is really hard for somebody, not all people, but for folks with autism, on average, it's hard to look in the eye. And if you put folks with autism in an fMRI so you can watch their brain in motion, kind of like a video, what you see is that their emotional centers are on fire, okay? If they're looking someone in the eye, they're taking in a tremendous amount of information that's emotion related, and it kind of feels like looking into the sun for too long, okay? And that's the internal feeling that's happening. Now, if you have a kid who's autistic and you're social skill training them to look someone in the eye for 3.2 seconds and then look away for a second, on for 3, off for 1, that's useful in a lot of ways, right? Because now they'll convey, hey, I'm interested in what you have to tell me. They might pick up on more emotional cues. But what's happening internally is hard. That doesn't go away just because they're engaging in the behavior. And there's two sides to this. One, there's the person with the autism, and then there's the receiver, or the person who's maybe neurotypical. And so there's two sides to this. And the person who's not autistic, isn't that helpful to know what's going on for that person? And so if someone's not looking you in the eye, you don't jump to they're being disrespectful or they're disinterested. I tell folks sometimes an autistic person's not looking you in the eye because they're trying to pay attention. By looking away, they're able to regulate their emotions to keep it in a place that's manageable, so now they can tune into what it is that you're saying. That's a totally different perspective, right? So I think when you think about masking, that's one of the examples I think that's really helpful.
And I just want to add really quickly, has anyone seen the show that we work on, Love on the Spectrum, on Netflix? Thank you guys so much for watching, first off. Second off, there's actually a great example of this if you watch the show. In season 3, which aired last year that we worked on, there is this incredible young woman named Madison. She just got engaged. She's doing well, but she was on a date. And there was a young autistic boy on the date. It was outside. There was a lot of wind. It was inclement weather. So he was having really hard times. He wasn't having a meltdown, but he had severe sensory overload going on. And as that date is going along, you could see Madison going from using her fidget spinner as a way of self-regulating and feeling comfortable to masking completely. She does a complete 180. And that's a lot of the time, again, going back to those societal norms. And it also just shows the complete opposite, because for so many boys, they're allowed to stim, and for girls in our community, it's often seen as something against a society norm. So I would definitely recommend, for those who want to see examples, to definitely watch the show on Netflix.
Thank you. This is starting to get super interesting. I wanted to go back to the question about how do we define neurodiversity, and just, if it's okay, share how I think about it, just because it might be helpful. To me, if we break down that term, neurodiversity, it's just simply saying that we all process the world differently. Every one of us. There is no neuronormal and neuroatypical and a black line between us. But if you just consider that for a moment, it's a very inclusive way to think about that word, and it also can induce curiosity, right? If I, just like you were saying, Ty, if when I look in somebody's eyes, I'm having a very different experience than somebody else looking back in my eyes, I can be curious rather than thinking, that's divergent, I'm normal. So I just wanted to add that. So when we talk about the workplace, we've kind of laid out some terms here: masking, burnout. Why would these concepts be important when we start thinking about inclusion in the workplace? And what might we do about these issues? This is a big question. And if you want, you don't have to answer in this 1, 2, 3 order. If somebody's really burning to answer this question, go for it.
Well, over time, we have seen the ROI benefits of hiring talented autistic people in the workplace. In, I believe it was 1970, the Department of Labor indicated that October is National Disability Handicap Awareness Month. And that led to larger conversations about children with disabilities. But one of the things that they realized as they got older is the true talents we have in the neurodiverse community. The Department of Labor indicates these 3 key facts, which I often speak to companies about. Those with disabilities are more likely to stay at a job longer. They're more likely to take less time off from work. And we talk about reasonable accommodations after COVID-19 and think about the bottom line. The majority of reasonable accommodations for neurodiverse hires cost absolutely nothing. And when it does, it's just an onboarding fee of $500. So it's about pivoting our conversations when we talk about inclusion from it's not what a company can do for a neurodiverse hire, it's what a neurodiverse hire can do for that company. And we've seen this over our history. We had Bill Gates 2 months ago on CNN indicating that if he was a child today, he would have probably been on the autism spectrum. Elon Musk came out on Saturday Night Live, love him or not. He came out discussing that he was the first autistic host to ever host Saturday Night Live. The list goes on and on. Indications of people like Albert Einstein. There's so many different people in our society who are some of the greatest talents that we have ever seen who are all neurodiverse. So it's not necessarily just about encouraging your employee resource group to start professional development around neurodiversity in the workplace. It's realizing that that talent is probably in your workplace today. And if you utilize them effectively, give them the reasonable accommodations they need to succeed, they can be some of your best employees. I think one of the statistics we haven't thrown out there yet for today's presentation is that based on statistics from the Department of Labor indicate that the majority of autistic and neurodiverse hires in the workplace today are either unemployed or underemployed. And a lot of people don't understand those true ROI benefits to these individuals. The 3 I've mentioned, but the list goes on and on. It just typically takes an HR hire or a strong employee resource group leader to just go on DLL.gov and really educate themselves a little bit about that. Because especially in our disability and autism community, for those who have a personal connection, like all of you who raise your hands, this is 24/7, 365. And if you don't have that personal connection, sometimes it just goes over your head. So it's important to continue that conversation around true inclusion.
Carrie, what's ROI?
ROI is return on investment.
There's a great book that I recommend every parent read. It's called Grit. And it talks about what makes children gritty. And what I mean by grit and what's discussed in the book is the ability to persevere through adversity. And children and adults that are anywhere in the neurodiverse spectrum, it's not just autism and ADHD, it's OCD, and there's the diagnoses go on. And what I've learned as an adult is that I cannot be nebulous. You see, I grew up here in the United States, and the American vernacular and the things that we say don't make sense, right? It's raining cats and dogs. This is a great one from Temple Granted that, she literally would see in her mind cats and dogs falling out of the sky. And so that is the experience that I had to take away is I didn't understand these things that were said, not because I didn't understand what it meant, but I didn't understand why somebody decided that this was going to be a thing that we say when it's raining outside. But there are a lot of things like that in our workplaces. I think that our language, because American society is very polite, honest, it just is. We are a polite society, which means we don't often say the thing that we actually need people to do or want them to do. And instructions in the workplace are nebulous. Get it done is not instructional. It is nebulous. It is, okay, well, what does done mean? And so what I think leaders need to focus on is being structural. What do you want exactly? What are the timelines and milestones? How do you set things clearly? Because not only will that help somebody who maybe cannot work effectively with vague instruction, but will help everyone. It doesn't hurt your team if you say, this is exactly what I need, here's what it should look like, and here's when I need it by. That is leadership, right? That is management. That is getting work done. And you haven't done it for one individual, you've done it for your entire team. Everyone benefits when we take away the nebulous language, when we take away vague instruction, and we provide clear guidance. I'm not micromanaging my team, I'm just setting clear expectations, and I hope that that helps individuals who struggle with just the crazy things that we say to each other.
I'm glad you bring up grit. One of my was of, sorry, I am really clumsy with this button, but one of my favorite studies was they were looking at autistic traits in the general population, and they were looking at what researchers call extraordinary achievement. So someone who has a breakthrough or innovation. And what they found was there was a really strong correlation between autistic traits and extraordinary achievement. In fact, if you break it down into ratios, it's about double the probability if someone's high in autistic traits. What I love about the study is they had a bunch of other factors that they looked at. So why is it the case that there's an association between these two things? And it didn't have to do with IQ. What drove that relationship was grit. It was that folks with autism have tremendous focus, and they can be really stubborn and very persistent at achieving a task to a point that they're willing to push through barriers that other people might stop at. So, I think we've heard about some of the benefits, right, of hiring folks who are neurodivergent, and that's certainly true. One thing I'll say is that sometimes you have to work on social skills with not being too blunt. If you're autistic, autistic folks tend to see the world just as it is, which I think is a wonderful quality. If I want to know if my outfit looks bad, I will ask, an awkward or autistic friend. They'll give me the true answer. Now, in the workplace, this can be tricky with smoke and mirrors and everything else that goes on in the typical United States workplace. And so if you're trying to message a certain thing that's not quite true, this could be a place where an autistic employee would blurt out, but that's not true. Now, is that convenient in the moment? I think it's probably pretty inconvenient. Is that the right thing in the long run? If you really want to be, the kind of company that achieves the things you want to achieve, I think that's highly valuable. I love to see when someone comes into a workplace and just changes the culture because they don't let people get away with things anymore.
Ty, if you don't mind, I love that folks that have been identified on the spectrum being successful, what we see as perseverance, which really is perseverance, has been a hyperfixation. And that is what I think we see very successful leaders like Bill Gates, for example, right? Like, they can just dial in. And in cybersecurity, we have something called penetration testers. These are hackers. They're paid to do this, right? This is like legal work. It's not always bad. My favorite pen tester is on the spectrum. He is an incredible individual. But when he is laser focused, you know what I don't do? I don't call him to a meeting, right? I don't stop his train of thought. And that was the thing that really was a huge adjustment, was that perseverance is so quickly derailed by what we call multitasking, right? Multitasking is not really, you can't do two things at once effectively, but we do that so often. How many meetings do any of you have in a course of a day? I can have 15 meetings in an 8-hour day, and that works okay for me, but for my individual, that was the worst thing ever. So I removed that barrier because for the fact that he needed that perseverance, he needed that time and that focus and that energy to do the work. Calling him to go do a meeting that wasn't valuable to him, may have been valuable to others, but wasn't valuable to him, would make him pretty angry. And so what I needed to learn is that that was not going to be a path to success. And I've used that with other individuals where I'm just like, okay, we're going to time block you. It's going to look like you have a 4-hour meeting today. Every day at this time to this time, you're just in a meeting. No one gets to put anything on your schedule. And that's how we adjusted to allow him that flexibility.
Lots of agreement with that, Laura. Okay, we're about to turn toward the audience questions. I have one quick question before we do that. Should neurodivergent people be open in the workplace about their identities?
I have
It's
an
a hot
opinion.
one.
I have a very, very big opinion on this. It is not up to the individual necessarily. It is sometimes up to their leadership. If you are not creating a place of psychological safety, it doesn't matter. You are not going to get authenticity out of any of your team members. Because again, it's not just somebody who maybe is on the spectrum. They might be struggling with depression and anxiety. Many Americans, men and women of every color, every ethnicity, struggle with some form of anxiety and depression. If you have not created a place of psychological safety in your workplace, and what that means is not just, hey, come talk to me, my door is open. That is veiled authenticity. But you coming to the table and saying, I'm struggling. You have to come to the table and say, hey, maybe I don't exactly understand your situation, but here's a place where I've struggled, and I'm going to be transparent with you. I'm going to give you a piece of me. I'm going to tell you about me. And by giving that relationship a chance, meeting with your individuals one-on-one on a regular basis, that's the only way you can build a relationship. Would you walk up to a stranger and be like, hey, Carrie, my name is Laura and I'm autistic? No. Most cases, you're just not going to do that. That we don't have that psychological safety with a complete stranger. But Ty and I know each other. We've known each other for a hot minute. So maybe I'll tell Ty, hey, Ty, I'm struggling with depression. The difference was I had a relationship with this individual and I didn't with this individual. There is a risk associated with exposing yourself, and that's really what you're doing. You're exposing a very vulnerable part of who you are. And as a female, Jenny, I don't know if you can this has been your experience, but you don't tell strangers your weaknesses as a woman. That is a recipe for disaster in some cases. No one wants to be taken advantage of. So I would say that it is not the individual's responsibility. It is the manager's responsibility to create a place where you have safety. And if you don't do that, don't expect the truth.
Yeah, I'm a fan of asking the individual what they want, right? But that doesn't always happen, of course. One little thing I might say, though, about that conversation is you might need to frame that for the individual. So say, hey, you could, if you want, we could tell everybody, about your autism or ADHD or whatever else is going on, but let me lay out maybe some of the pros and cons. I'd like to hear what you have to say as well. Now, you don't have to do that, so no pressure, but if you don't say it, here's some of the pros and cons, and let's, once again, collaboratively work together on that. So sometimes there needs to be that framing, that extra step involved when you're having these conversations with someone who's neurodivergent.
What I like to say is there are third-party sites that some companies do today. When you put on your resume that you have autism or a neurodiverse condition, you are immediately taken out of that potential interview pool. This is happening in a lot of our companies today. So the most important thing I tell neurodivergent talent that I work with is specifically this: do your research. There is a great index called the Disability Equality Index, which rates companies from 0 to 100, 0 being the worst, 100 being the best, on how they actually provide accommodations in the workplace for those with disabilities and what their diversity hiring actually looks like. So doing the research and then waiting until you actually get that job opportunity when you actually have the job and you're discussing salary to bring up those reasonable accommodations, because that's part of the ADA. A lot of these other organizations go out of their way especially in our current climate, to separate people right away if you say that you are neurodivergent in the workplace.
There are a lot of questions. I think we need to have part 2 of this panel. So I'm not going to be able to get to all of the questions, but let's just see where we get. I'm going to bring this one to the top of the stack because it's very, very interesting to me. So this person asks, will you speak to PDA, also called pathological demand avoidance? In my world, we changed that acronym. I don't like the word pathological. So we changed the acronym to persistent desire for autonomy. So whether you use whatever acronym you use, let me just define this very quickly because some of you might be like, what is she talking about? So PDA, some people have this more strongly than others. I find that I have it when I'm under stress and less so when I'm not under stress. But demand avoidance is essentially that I might feel really overwhelmed or say no to you if you ask me to do something and I can't process it. So it may look to you like I'm stubborn and I just don't want to be told what to do, or I have an authority problem. But inside, and I don't have a strong PDA profile, so I'm just trying to explain it from the inside to be helpful. But if I have demand avoidance, it's not that I'm trying to be a pain, it's that my system is overwhelmed because I'm processing differently than you want me to process. And so I might need to say no. So that's a very quick definition of PDA. I know there's so much more to say about it. The question is, how can an autistic adult overcome this profound block to engage in life in a productive way? Panelists, help us.
So this is actually something, so we just got renewed for season 5 of Love on the Spectrum, which was really, really exciting. And I just did the autism sensitivity training. That's their autism consultant to the crew on meeting every single cast member where they are. And we actually had a slide dedicated to pathological demand avoidance. So this is very, very common now. Honestly, I think most importantly, understanding that a lot of autistic and neurodiverse individuals are very concise and very direct. So one of the examples I gave during the training was, instead of we're going to ask you these questions next, try, would you like to go through the question now or take a quick break first? I think a lot of principles that work great for our kids, especially when we talk about things like the ownership principle, giving them the opportunity to take ownership in what they are doing can definitely help them when it comes to their overall communication, not only our K through university students, but also our people in the neurodiversity hiring process, because individuals often, I mean, not only autistic and neurodiverse, may use avoidance strategies because it may help them feel a little bit more comfortable in the workplace today. So I think that's one of the biggest things, giving options and really following through on that ownership principle philosophy.
I'm going to take this in a way that's actually not work related. There are a lot of people who struggle with their neurodiversity and cleaning. And what OCD behaviors have been associated very closely to hoarding behaviors, and hoarding behaviors are often very similarly connected to just having a unclean living environment. And the challenge for a lot of people is that you see essentially an elephant and you're trying to eat the elephant. And how do you eat an elephant, right? And the saying is, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. But especially for women who are struggling with anxiety and depression, which is oftentimes what leads to a lot of the hoarding behaviors and a lot of the issues with the cleanliness, the fact is that no matter what you say, you cannot change it because they are being avoidant, because it's so big, right? It's just so overwhelming. This is a case of when bringing in somebody to help you is very important. And there are a lot of companies that now specialize in special cleaning that will essentially help individuals who are struggling with this to get their house clean. Because once the house gets to a state of cleanliness, then they can keep it clean. But getting it to that state of clean is impossible. And we don't ask people to do impossible things. I don't ask anyone to move a wrecking ball by hand. It's just impossible. And that's kind of how it's addressed, is that, okay, we need to bring in equipment, and we need to bring in people, and we need to bring in experts to help. And once you can get to that first clean, for example, it's much easier to maintain. The same is true in our office environments. There are times where we ask people to do something that maybe, for me, seems simple. I would just break down a task. I no longer do that. I say, if you are struggling with this task, and I ask people about the tasks they're working on every single week, have you considered, and then technology, right? So Carrie is an expert in this, and you could probably speak to it at length. I say, okay, go to AI. We have AI tools within our organization, and break down the task. Have AI help you break down your task that you're doing. Have it give you some recommendations, because you may be stuck in one of two ways. Either time blocking, you need that time dedicated towards that space, or just getting started. And sometimes those technologies and tools can be really helpful getting past some of the paralysis that I think exists.
This is a really nice way to think about the neurodiversity lens. So we could say pathological demand avoidance that puts the onus on the individual. I mean, how many of you at work on a regular basis think, why are we doing this right now? Why are we talking about the color of the notebooks? This is not useful. This is not good demand, right? And this is another way that having a neurodiverse workplace could be valuable. If someone says to me, last night was a good example. So last night, just because I've been here a few times, they said, will you say something spontaneous to the group about being a CWA panelist? That's like my worst nightmare, right? I actually don't like to talk in those kinds of settings. But the person who asked it in a great way, she said, hey, would you say something real quick? And the reason why is because it's useful to the students for this reason, and it's useful to new people for this reason. Now I'm totally on board, okay? So as an employer, if you get in that habit, or as a manager, to think, hey, what is the demand and what's the rationale or the reason for it? That's actually a really good habit, not just for the person who's neurodiverse, but also for you as an organization.
Okay, we have 10 minutes and we have a wonderful stack of questions, so I'm going to try to combine 3 questions here. So the first question is, what is your best advice for a female teenager who has light ASD and who is going to be in her first year of college next fall? That's question number 1. Another person is asking, how do I tell where I am on the spectrum? And another person is asking, how do you support neurodiverse people entering into the workforce without promoting on that there are just a few industries or roles that they belong in? So I'm putting these 3 together because these are people out here who are asking about themselves. How do I do this? So it's a little bit of a different perspective than what do we do in the workplace. But can you share to at least 3 people in the audience who are wondering about their own identities and how to take care of themselves?
Maybe I could speak to the incoming freshmen a bit. Let's think about this through a strength-based lens. And some of the strengths that folks with light ASD might have is that you're really good at pattern recognition. You're good at being detail-oriented. You're good when there's a structure, right? And you can kind of march through that structure. You're persistent, so you're going to practice. If you need to practice something, you're as good a candidate as any to do that. And what I've seen, at least anecdotally in my experience, is that when folks make that kind of social transition and they have success, there's usually a degree of mental preparation that goes into that. And you just have to envision where the demand's going to be, where the challenge is going to be. You could even do informational interviewing to find out from people who are already there, what are some of the challenges you think I might encounter, preferably from someone who knows you and who's close to you. And then do what you do well. Prepare, practice. And you can't anticipate everything and you can't get ready for everything, but when you do rely on those strengths, I think it really prepares you well for the situation. The other thing I'll say is, once you get on the ground there, all of the challenges that you might have emotionally or by feeling overwhelmed, those are going to happen, right? And so even having what we call proactive coping about that, so you can self-talk and say, almost from a removed perspective, this is what's happening. I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling flooded right now. But because you've prepared, you'll be much more likely to have coping techniques in place for how to handle those situations, whether it's maybe doing a little bit of masking or maybe even just politely removing yourself from the situation. You'll have some strategies in place.
I'd like to speak to the person who is looking for support going into the workplace without promoting industries. Going back to their, and if I'm mispronouncing this, I apologize. I think it's Ichiban. Essentially, it's something you are interested in and like to do, something you can do that is like a job that exists today, and something that pays you. And you need to find something that's in the core of those things. Because if you are doing work that you do not find purpose that aligns with you as an individual, you're going to struggle. If you are doing work that is monotonous and boring, you're going to struggle. Instead, find something that gives you purpose, that you have a passion for, that will pay you money, and that will make you the most successful. And once you've maybe used some AI tool to help you figure out what that is, because you should have a conversation, I recommend the next thing, which is find your why. This is a Simon Sinek thing. Find your purpose is really easy once you have talked yourself into and out of that process, and do that with somebody that you care about and cares about you. They are very helpful mirrors. And then the last part of that is find somebody in the industry that you want to go into and have conversations with them. Find out what it's really like. Cybersecurity sounds really sexy. It's not. It's boring, right? For the most part, 80% of my work is super, super boring. That may not be for you. It may look cool when you watch it in the movies, but it's never that fast. So that is what I would recommend for you, and I hope that you find the support that you're looking for. Reach out on LinkedIn. Go find strangers. There are a lot of us out there, and we want very desperately to help you.
Yeah, so I'll do like a rapid fire for these 3 questions. So the autistic teen, know that you're capable. I don't know who it is in the audience, or if you're a parent talking about your child, but I was always told that I had to do mechanical engineering growing up on the spectrum. And I never wanted to do that. I wanted to become the next Kobe Bryant, and I wanted to be the 6th member of the Backstreet Boys. So I had an affinity for sports. I got a degree in sport management at Seton Hall University before changing career paths, took my love of theater and music to find a full-time career in public speaking, which I've been doing for the past 15 years. Know that you are capable, and don't let anyone deter you from understanding you're capable. Where in the spectrum? Google MChat model. For the person who asked where on the spectrum, it's a great tool to be able, they typically use this model to diagnose children on the spectrum, but it shows a lot of key characteristics of what autism looks like in our community today, which will help you break down what level of autism you are, because it's 3 levels. Looking for support going into the workplace. Overall, it's time to give autistic and neurodiverse individuals the same chance to succeed that the world so often gives everyone else. And that's why I give trainings, and that's why I talk a lot about the onboarding process and the importance of giving these people the true opportunity. If you are someone who is great at math, use the AI model like we were discussing a little bit today, break it down and see where you might be able to find the most success in that realm.
Okay, so we have just about 3 minutes, and I'm going to just go for one last question. We probably won't cover it completely. But this question is, how can human resources best support neurodiverse employees? And do you have tips for HR or supervisors managing their performance? So you have just like a minute, each of you.
I'd say, things now is there's so many resources. We're overwhelmed with information, but there's a lot of information available. So take the initiative to educate yourself about some of the things we've talked about today. There's great, books and media now that can help with that. One of the other things I'd say is one of the big mistakes that's happened in research and in clinical psychology is that we've imposed our neurotypical ways on trying to understand neurodiverse people. And so please learn from our mistakes and do a bottom up. Always ask, don't assume what you think is going on. Ask the person, so for you, tell me what are some of the challenges? For you, what could be better about the workplace that would make you more successful? So more qualitative, bottom up from the person themselves rather than coming in with good intentions, but intentions that are from your perspective.
I am currently working very actively with my human resources department, and I think that it is important, just a couple things. Slow down. As a leader, slow down, because you may want to go fast, but you need to understand where that individual is coming from. That's a great point about asking them what their preferences is. I think that is also true. You should ask the preferences of how do you want to be recognized publicly, privately? How do you need to be given feedback in a way that is going to be supportive of you? Clarify priorities, reduce unnecessary task switching, and allow for autonomy. Those, in just my personal experience and with the people I've worked with, have been the most successful things I could do and that HR could help me support, because ultimately we are designing work that doesn't punish a difference.
Real quick.
Sure. I also want to give a quick thank you to Diamond Hut in Jersey City, Sean Gupta, for helping make my participation at this conference possible. Everyone can write this down. I think it's one of the best pieces of advice I've ever given a human resource department. Small questions lead to big outcomes. Small questions can lead to big outcomes, because years ago, we didn't have any ERG groups. We didn't have a lot of diversity in the workplace. Human resources who ask for anonymous feedback from their employees are some of the leading Fortune 500 companies today. We look from the Googles, some Microsofts, and everyone in the world. Small questions lead to big outcomes.
Okay, thank you so much, panelists. And I just want to add a very quick story. So a client of mine works in tech and engineering, and she identifies as a neurodivergent person. She is so fast that she can do her job in a couple hours of the day and then do other things that she's really more interested in, like personal development and things like that. But she got a new boss, and her boss said, I'm actually really curious about you, and I want to know, how can we keep you here? And she said, well, you would let me work from home at least half of the week. You would give me an area to work when I do have to be in the office that is quiet, where I can close the door, and I would not have to use fluorescent lights, and I would get to sit in whatever way I want, including on the floor. And this awesome boss said, great, let's do all of that for you. And now this person is much more interested in her work and actually putting her hyper focus into her work in addition to the other things she likes to do. So I thought that was just an uplifting story to end with. I wanted to thank our panelists for volunteering to be here. And I also wanted to thank all of you for being here and getting curious about neurodiversity. And enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.